Well, last time we talked about what the potential political fallout of these negotiations are going to be, so go watch yesterday's video if you want to cover that. Today, however, we're going to turn to the European Council of Foreign Affairs, because quite frankly, their view is just it's in the headline itself, the very title of this video. Those Brexit negotiations, the descent into hell. Let's see what it's going to go. The next Brexit crisis point is fast approaching. The British government must decide by the 30th of June whether to request an extension to the current transition period. The moment could be used to avert a disastrous economic rupture between the United Kingdom and the European Union at the end of the year. But nothing serious will happen on the British side unless Prime Minister Boris Johnson acts. Will he make the effort? Well, we've already discussed about that yesterday. Johnson's own views on Brexit are notoriously opportunistic and flexible, as his unionist allies in Northern Ireland discovered to their cost last autumn. But within his own party, he has painted himself into something of a corner. By purging party moderates before the general election in December and by filling his cabinet with committed Europhobes, free market Brexiteers now dominate the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Their supremacy was made clear in January when the government legislated to rule out any extension of the transition. The pandemic the pandemic ought to, of course, to be given the Prime Minister both incentive and political cover for manoeuvring out of this corner and exploring ways to break the current negotiating deadlock. The latest polling shows that the mood of the British public has shifted, and by now a significant margin, and all favours extension. But in practice, COVID-19 compounds Johnson's problems as the ideologues urge that any adverse impact from the no-deal Brexit they favour will be lost in the fallout from the virus. Worse, it is those same free market Brexiteers with whom he is now having to contend as he resists their calls to reopen the economy. Steve Barker, leading MP, the leading light of the European Research Group faction, whose members rightly claim that Brexit is largely their doing, has called on Johnson to end the absurd and dystopian tyrannical lockdown. In such circumstances, it is little wonder that the government has so far taken what is in domestic political terms in the line of the least resistance on Brexit negotiations, to stand and pat and run down the clock, all the while asserting that the EU will inadvertently see sense at the 11th hour, provided that Britain holds its nerves. And such a strategy, of course, sits all too comfortably with the breezy optimism and rejection of inconvenient facts that have always been Johnson's political stock and trade. Yet Johnson is not stupid. He will realise, if he pauses to think, that the pandemic has hollowed below the waterline his buccaneering vision of a global Britain championing free trade as it strikes advantageous new trade deals from China to America. Not that it was ever seaworthy in the first place. As the retreat from globalisation leads to a renewed emphasis on economic cooperation with regional partners, the UK can no longer hope to trade its way out of a virus-induced insolvency without good access to the continental market. This is the reality with which Johnson will have to contend next year in the absence of a deal. And while it may be possible to blur the statistics, there will be no disguising what is happening if 2021 begins not just with general economic collapse, but with no conspicuous disruption of goods trafficking across the Straits of the Channel or French fishermen blockading the port of Calais. So, the time to face up to the problem is now, before the possibility of extension has been overtaken by the calendar. or, if not, face up to it, at least fudge it. A former trade advisor to Theresa May has just come up with one smart way in which the old trick of extending the time for negotiations while discussing it as a period for implementation might be repeated. Ingenuity will find others if that one does not fit. But why any such evolution of critically requires is for Johnson to make an effort and expend the political capital in order to address a problem that is still half a year away. Nothing in Johnson's record to date suggests a willingness to meet trouble halfway, when charm, bluster, and good fortune might yet make the problem evaporate. But here too, the virus may just have changed the landscape. Johnson must know, even naturally, if he denies it, that Britain would not now be topping the European death statistics in the government's initial response had it not been so lethally complacent. Equally, he must know that the same breezy insolence about the need for physical distancing and very nearly costed him his own life. Can we now hope that Johnson will apply this learning to the Brexit negotiations? It is less effort, of course, just to stick with the easiest path. Restricting your steps is a bit hard, as Virgil pointed out, but the alternative prospect is truly hellish. And there we have it. This is going to be an absolute ridiculous, and it's insane. It really is. And they've now, as can clearly put, look, the moderates have been purged from the Tory party. We now, we said it before. Look, if you vote for Brexit at the time we were saying this, you will hand this country to the most hard right party this country has seen in years. The party has gone even more hard right, because it's now filled with Brexit ideologicals who just don't seem to see the sun for the clouds. To them, it's unbelievable. It really is. They're still dreaming of this fantasy and upland that no expert, or regardless of whatever industry they're in, says exists. Just doesn't. It's not going to be there. And even if they're saying, and this is what's insane about all this whole thing, they're just going, oh great, we can get away with a hard Brexit, and then we can just blame it on the virus because no one will see the numbers. But here's the thing, as it's just pointed out there, global economic cooperation is coming back in force. And even if, because this is, I think this is what will probably happen. Let's say this all comes to pass. What will happen is that Europe and the rest of the world will get back up on their feet, and the UK economy will just be stagnant, or it will just get even worse. And that will be because of Brexit, because it doesn't have those close economic links with being in the single market and European Union. It's going to be interesting to say the least. And it's these Brexiteers who are most responsible, because they can't seem to accept facts and reality, because they all have ulterior motives, which is, hey, we own these big businesses, and yeah, they're going to take a hit, but in the end, we get a bigger slice of the pie. We're not suddenly subject to the European tax regulations, which would expose massive multiple dealings. One of the things that has been pointed out, that if the government closed the tax loopholes that lets lots of money leak out from this country, the government could very, very easily pay for the furlough bill. Will the Tory government actually do that? No. It's decided to, instead of, as apparently so, instead of, applauding the NHS as for all the good work they've done, instead they're going to be rewarded with a pay freeze. And yet more crippling austerity. You think austerity has been bad now? Wait until, again, if it happens, the coronavirus crisis, economic crash that it causes, the no-deal Brexit compacted together. You think you've seen you think you've seen austerity now? You haven't seen anything yet.